Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request. Most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day. We put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark. And if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Shame is not emotion but is technology, is the mechanism through which groups control individuals, through which societies enforce norms, through which collectives ensure conformity without the need for constant surveillance, constant punishment, constant external force, because the force becomes internal, becomes the voice inside that judges, that condemns, that produces the feeling of being fundamentally wrong, fundamentally defective, fundamentally unworthy. And this feeling is more powerful than any external punishment, is more effective than any threat, is the weapon that societies have perfected over millennia, the conversion of social judgment into self-judgment, the transformation of external control into internal monitoring. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is happening at every moment, in every decision, in every thought that might deviate from what is acceptable, what is expected, what is required. And the requirement is not explicit, is not written down, is absorbed through observation, through imitation, through the 1,000 small corrections that shape children into members of the group. And the shaping is violent, is coercive, is the moulding of consciousness to fit the pattern that the society demands. And the demands vary by culture, by context, by what behaviours serve the group's interests. But the mechanism is universal, is present in every society, is the way that humans have solved the problem of coordination, the problem of getting individuals to behave in ways that benefit the collective, even when those behaviours conflict with individual interest, and the conflict is constant. Is the tension between what the self wants and what the group requires? And shame is what tips the balance, is what makes the group's requirements feel like the self's requirements, is what converts external judgment into internal compulsion. And the compulsion is not experienced as coercion, but as conscience, as the sense of right and wrong that seems to come from within, but is really coming from the group, from the internalized voices of parents, of peers, of authorities, of all the representatives of social norms who have spoken, and whose speaking has been absorbed, has been converted into the inner voice that judges, that shames, that produces the feeling that is unbearable, that is worse than pain. That is the sense of being exposed, of being seen in one's wrongness, in one's defectiveness, in one's failure to meet the standards that everyone else seems to meet effortlessly. And the effortlessness is illusion, is the result of successful internalization, is what happens when shame has done its work, when the external has become internal, when the monitoring is so automatic that it feels like nature, like the way things are, like the voice of truth rather than the voice of power. And power is what shame is the exercise of control, is the way that the group extends its reach into the individual, into the mind, into the private space where decisions are made. And the decisions are not free, are not autonomous, are shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of exposure, by the need to maintain the facade of being acceptable, of being worthy, of being someone who meets the standards. And the standards are impossible, are designed to be impossible, are set high enough that everyone fails, that everyone is vulnerable to shame, that everyone needs the group's forgiveness, the group's acceptance, the group's willingness to overlook the failures, as long as the proper contrition is shown, the proper submission is performed, the proper deference is given to the norms that were violated, and the violation is inevitable, is guaranteed, is the way that shame maintains its power. Because if everyone could meet the standards, then shame would lose its force, would become irrelevant, would no longer be useful for control. And so the standards are calibrated, are adjusted, are maintained at the level where most people are failing most of the time, are feeling inadequate, are needing reassurance, are seeking validation. And the seeking is the mechanism, is the way that shame produces conformity, produces obedience, produces the constant effort to be good, to be acceptable, to be worthy of belonging. And belonging is what is at stake, is what shame threatens, is the thing that will be lost if the shame is too great, if the exposure is too complete, if the judgment is too severe, and the severity is variable, is depending on culture, on context, on what the group needs to enforce, and what it needs to enforce varies, is different in honor cultures, where shame is about reputation, about the family's standing, about the public face that must be maintained, and in guilt cultures, where shame is about internal states, about intentions, about the purity of the conscience, and the conscience is the internalized judge, is the voice that speaks even when no one is watching, that produces guilt even in private, that makes the internal monitoring as effective as external surveillance. And the effectiveness is what makes guilt cultures powerful, is what allows them to function with less overt control, with less public punishment. Because the punishment is internal, is the guilt that gnaws, that torments, that produces the feeling of being wrong, even when the behavior is hidden, even when the transgression is secret. And the secret is what guilt cultures target, is what they make unbearable, is what they convert into shame through the internalization of norms, through the creation of conscience, through the training of the inner voice to judge, to condemn, to produce the feeling that is worse than any external punishment. And the worse is the genius of the system, is the efficiency of shame, is the way that control becomes self-control, that power becomes invisible, that coercion becomes choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of guilt, by the need to avoid the feeling that is unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is the emotion that is more painful than physical pain, that is more threatening than external danger, that is triggering the same neural circuits as social death, as exile, as the exclusion that in ancestral environments meant literal death, meant the end of survival. And so the fear of shame is ancient, is hardwired, is operating at levels deeper than reason, deeper than conscious thought, is producing reactions that are automatic, that are visceral, that are overwhelming. And the overwhelming is what makes shame effective, is what makes it useful for control, is what makes it the primary mechanism through which societies enforce norms, maintain order, ensure that individuals behave in ways that serve the collective. And the serving is not voluntary, is not chosen, is coerced through shame, through the threat of exposure, through the fear of judgment. And the judgment is constant, is omnipresent, is coming from others and from the self, from the internalized voices that have become the conscience, the superego, the inner critic that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to feel acceptable, to feel worthy, to feel free from the threat of shame. And the threat is maintained through public shaming, through the rituals that expose transgressions, that make violations visible, that demonstrate what happens to those who break the rules. And the demonstration is warning, is deterrent, is the reminder that shame is always possible, is always lurking, is always ready to destroy the reputation, the standing, the sense of belonging that makes life bearable. And the bearable is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it uses as leverage to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power is distributed according to the rules, and the rules are not natural, are not discovered, are imposed, are created by those who benefit from them, by those who have power, by those who use shame to maintain their position, to prevent challenge, to ensure that those below stay below, that those who are shamed remain shamed, that the hierarchy is preserved, and the preservation is what shame serves, is what it accomplishes, is the maintenance of order through the creation of internal monitoring, through the transformation of social control into self-control. And the self-control is not freedom, but is the most perfect form of slavery, is the condition where the chains are invisible, where the prison is internal, where the guard is the self, and the self cannot escape, cannot rebel, cannot refuse, because the refusal would produce shame, would trigger the feeling that is unbearable, would expose the self to judgment, and the judgment is what is feared most, is what drives behaviour, is what makes people do things they do not want to do, believe things they do not believe, perform roles they do not choose, because the alternative is shame, is exposure, is the loss of belonging, and belonging is survival, is the thing that makes life possible, that makes existence tolerable, that provides meaning and purpose and the sense that one matters. And mattering is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it holds hostage. And the hostage is the self, is the identity that is constructed through the internalization of norms, through the absorption of judgments, through the acceptance of the standards that the group imposes, and the imposing is not negotiable, is not optional, is the price of membership, the cost of belonging, the requirement for survival, and survival requires shame, requires the capacity to feel it, to be shaped by it, to use it to regulate behaviour, to monitor thought, to police the boundaries of the acceptable. And the acceptable is narrow, is constrained, is defined by the group, and the group's definition is arbitrary, is variable, is serving interests that are not the individual's interests, that are the interests of power, of hierarchy, of the maintenance of the order that benefits some at the expense of others. And the others are kept in place through shame, through the feeling that they are less, that they are wrong, that they are unworthy, and the unworthiness is not fact but is assignment, is the judgment that the group makes, that the individual internalizes, that becomes the truth of the self, the core belief around which identity is organized, and the organization is pathological, is producing suffering, is creating the sense that the self is fundamentally defective, fundamentally wrong, fundamentally deserving of the judgment, and the judgment is harsh, is relentless, is coming from within and without, from the self and from others, and the others are always watching, always judging, always ready to shame. And the readiness is maintained through public shaming, through the revival of practices that were thought to be barbaric, to be outdated, to be incompatible with modern values, but are returning, are being embraced, are being used with new technologies, with social media, with the platforms that make public shaming instantaneous, global, permanent. And the permanence is new, is the addition that technology brings, is the way that shame now lasts forever, is recorded, is searchable, is never forgotten. And the never forgotten is the enhancement of shame, is the intensification of its power, is the conversion of temporary judgment into permanent stigma. And the stigma is the mark, is the label, is the thing that defines the person, that reduces them to their failure, to their transgression, to the moment when they were exposed, when they were judged, when they were shamed. And the shaming is not correction, is not education, is not intended to help, but is intended to punish, to exclude, to destroy. And the destruction is what public shaming achieves, is what it is designed to do, is the elimination of the person from the community, from the acceptable, from the realm of those who matter. And the mattering is what is taken away, is what shame removes, is what is lost when the judgment is public, when the exposure is complete, when the person becomes the embodiment of wrongness, of defectiveness, of unworthiness, and the unworthiness is total, is overwhelming, is the condition that produces not just embarrassment, but the deeper shame, the toxic shame, the shame that is not about what one did, but about what one is, and the is the problem, is the conversion of behavior into identity, is the judgment that extends from the action to the actor, from the mistake to the person, from the moment to the essence. And the essence is what shame targets, is what it damages, is what it destroys, is the sense of being fundamentally acceptable, fundamentally worthy, fundamentally deserving of existence. And the existence becomes questionable, becomes something that must be justified, must be earned, must be proven through the constant performance of acceptability, and the performance is exhausting, is impossible, is the burden that shame creates, is the weight that is carried by everyone who has internalized the judgment, who has absorbed the norms, who has become the monitor of their own behavior, and the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is producing anxiety, is producing the sense that at any moment the failure might happen, the exposure might occur, the shame might descend, and the descending is what is feared, is what drives the performance, is what makes people desperate to be good, to be acceptable, to be beyond reproach. And the beyond reproach is impossible, is unattainable, is the standard that ensures everyone is vulnerable, everyone is exposed, everyone is subject to shame, and the subject is the self, is the identity that is constructed through shame, that is defined by the internalized judgments, that is shaped by the fear of exposure. And the exposure is what social media enables, is what the digital age amplifies, is the possibility that at any moment anything might be revealed, anything might be judged, anything might become the basis for public shaming. And the basis is often trivial, is often a mistake, is often something that in another context would be ignored, would be forgotten, would be forgiven, but in the context of public shaming becomes unforgivable, becomes the thing that defines, that destroys, that reduces the person to the object of judgment, to the target of collective rage, to the scapegoat that the group needs, that the society uses, that shame requires. Because shame is not just individual, but is collective, is not just personal, but is social, is not just feeling, but is function, is the mechanism through which groups maintain cohesion, through which societies enforce norms, through which power maintains itself, and the maintenance is achieved through the constant threat of shame, through the ever-present possibility of exposure, through the fear that keeps people in line, keeps them conforming, keeps them performing the roles that the society assigns. And the assignment is not chosen, is not negotiated, is imposed through shame, through the feeling that to deviate is to be wrong, to be defective, to be unworthy. And the unworthiness is the lever, is the tool, is the way that power operates, is the currency that shame represents, is the thing that is spent, that is accumulated, that is traded in the social economy, where reputation is wealth, where honor is capital, where shame is debt, and the debt is inherited, is passed down, is the legacy of transgression, is what families carry, what lineages bear, what communities cannot escape. Because shame is not just about the individual, but is about the group, is about the collective honor that must be maintained, that must be protected, that must be defended against the contamination of shame. And the contamination is what happens when one member transgresses, when one person is exposed, when one individual brings shame upon the family, upon the community, upon the collective. And the collective responds with punishment, with exclusion, with the violence that is justified by the need to restore honor, to remove the stain, to eliminate the source of shame. And the elimination can be social, can be physical, can be the death that honor cultures prescribe, that honor killings enforce, that the logic of shame demands when the transgression is too great, when the exposure is too complete, when the only way to restore honor is to destroy the source of dishonor, and the destruction is murder, is violence, is the extreme form of shame's power, is what happens when shame is not just emotion, but is law, is not just feeling, but is justice, is not just internal, but is external, is enforced not just by conscience, but by the community. And the community is the enforcer, is the judge, is the executioner, is the thing that makes shame lethal, that makes shame literal death. And the death is what shame has always threatened, is what it has always implied, is what it is metaphorically, and sometimes literally, producing, is the end of social existence, the end of belonging, the end of the self as recognized, as valued, as mattering. And the mattering is what makes life worth living, is what makes existence bearable, is what shame takes away, is what shame holds hostage, is what shame uses to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power remains distributed according to the rules. And the rules are maintained through shame, are enforced through guilt, are perpetuated through the internalization of judgment, through the conversion of external control into internal monitoring, through the creation of the conscience that is not freedom, but is the most sophisticated form of slavery, is the condition where the individual has become the agent of their own oppression, has become the enforcer of the norms that harm them, has become the voice that judges, that shames, that makes life unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is what it is designed to produce, is the mechanism through which societies control individuals, through which power maintains itself, through which the currency of shame is spent, is accumulated, is traded, is the thing that makes social life possible, that makes coordination achievable, that makes conformity enforceable, and the enforcement is continuous, is total, is the permanent condition of social existence, is the cost of belonging, is the price of survival, is the burden that everyone carries, is the weight of shame, of guilt, of the internalized judgment that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to be free, to be acceptable, to be beyond the reach of shame. And the reach is infinite, is extending into every moment, every decision, every thought, is the omnipresent threat that keeps people in line, that makes them perform, that makes them conform, that makes them serve the group even when the group is serving power, is maintaining hierarchy, is preserving the order that benefits the few at the expense of the many, and the many are controlled through shame, are kept in place through guilt, are made to believe that their suffering is their fault, is their failure, is their unworthiness, and the unworthiness is the lie, is the mechanism, is the currency of shame, is what keeps the system running, what makes power invisible, what converts coercion into choice. And the choice is not free but is shaped by shame, by guilt, by the fear of judgment, by the anticipation of exposure, by the threat that is always there, always present, always ready to descend. And the descending is what everyone fears, is what everyone avoids, is what everyone works to prevent. And the preventing is the work, is the performance, is the conformity, is the submission, is the acceptance of the norms, the internalization of the judgment, the absorption of the shame that is the currency, that is the mechanism, that is the way that societies control, that power maintains itself, that individuals are shaped into members of the group. And the shaping is violence, is coercion, is the transformation of the self into the thing that the group needs. And the need is conformity, is obedience, is the willingness to carry the shame, to feel the guilt, to be the subject of judgment. And the subject is what shame creates, is what guilt produces, is the self that is never free, never acceptable, never beyond the reach of the currency that is shame, that is guilt, that is the mechanism through which humanity controls itself, enforces its norms, maintains its order, and the order is maintained through suffering, through the feeling that is unbearable, through the emotion that is technology, through the currency of shame. Balancing intuition and theory. There is a method in philosophy that claims to find truth not by discovering foundations, not by building from self-evident axioms, not by appealing to revelation or pure reason, but by seeking coherence, by adjusting beliefs until they fit together, by moving back and forth between particular judgments and general principles until a stable equilibrium is reached. And this method is called reflective equilibrium, and it was developed most fully by John Rawls in his work on justice, though the idea stretches back through the history of philosophy, back to the recognition that neither pure theory nor pure intuition can be trusted alone, that each must constrain and correct the other. That truth emerges from their interaction rather than from either in isolation. The process begins with considered judgments, with the moral intuitions people have about particular cases. Intuitions like slavery is wrong. Promise breaking requires justification. Causing unnecessary suffering is bad. And these intuitions are the raw material, the data that ethical theory must account for. But they are not infallible, not sacrosanct, not immune to revision. They are provisional starting points that might be mistaken, might be the product of bias or prejudice or limited understanding, and the method acknowledges this, acknowledges that intuitions can be wrong while still insisting they are the only place to start, the only access we have to moral reality, because if we do not begin with intuitions, then where do we begin? What other source of moral knowledge is there? And the answer seems to be none. No pure reason that delivers ethical truths, no perception that reveals moral facts, no authority that can be trusted without question. Only the messy collection of judgments people make about cases, judgments that often conflict, that differ across cultures, that change over time, and yet somehow, from this unpromising material, moral philosophy must be constructed. Rawls distinguished between narrow and wide reflective equilibrium. Narrow equilibrium is achieved when particular judgments and general principles are brought into coherence with each other, but nothing else. When the theory fits the intuitions and the intuitions fit the theory, but no attention is paid to alternative theories, to background beliefs, to empirical facts about human nature or social organization. And this is relatively easy to achieve, but not very stable, not very trustworthy, because it might be that another theory fits the intuitions just as well, might be that the intuitions themselves rest on false empirical beliefs, might be that the whole system is coherent but disconnected from reality. A beautiful castle built on sand and wide equilibrium tries to avoid this by expanding the scope of what must cohere, by requiring that the theory fit not just with moral intuitions but with considered beliefs about psychology, about society, about human nature, with alternative moral theories that have been seriously considered and rejected for good reasons. And this makes equilibrium harder to achieve, but more robust, more likely to track truth rather than merely achieve internal consistency, because it forces the theorist to confront challenges, to test the theory against competitors, to ensure that coherence is not just local, but global, not just moral, but includes everything the person believes. But this raises an immediate problem, the problem of whether intuitions are really data, whether they deserve the role Rawls assigns them, whether they are observations of moral reality or merely expressions of cultural conditioning, of evolutionary adaptation, of psychological bias. And if intuitions are not perceptions of moral facts, but products of contingent causal processes, then why should they constrain theory at all? Why not just construct moral theory from scratch using pure reason, using consistency and simplicity and other theoretical virtues, and let the intuitions fall where they may? And some philosophers have argued exactly this, have argued that intuitions are unreliable, that they differ too much across individuals and cultures to be evidence, that they are shaped by factors that have nothing to do with truth, by emotion and self-interest and social pressure. And if this is right, then reflective equilibrium is not a method for discovering moral truth, but for rationalizing prejudice, for systematizing whatever intuitions one happens to have, for building coherent theories that reflect nothing more than the contingent moral psychology of the theorist. Rawls was aware of this objection. He restricted the relevant intuitions to considered judgments made under favourable conditions, when the person is calm and informed and has no personal stake in the outcome, when they are not distracted by irrelevant factors, when they have thought carefully about the case, and this restriction is supposed to filter out the unreliable intuitions, the ones produced by bias or emotion or confusion, and leave only the reliable ones, the ones that are genuinely responsive to moral reality. But critics ask how we know which intuitions are made under favourable conditions, how we distinguish the reliable from the unreliable without already having a moral theory. And if we need a theory to identify good intuitions, then we cannot use intuitions to build the theory. We are reasoning in a circle, using theory to select data and data to support theory. And this circularity seems vicious, seems to undermine the entire method, because it means we can get any result we want just by choosing the right intuitions, by labeling the intuitions that fit our preferred theory as considered judgments and dismissing the rest as unreliable. And there is no independent check, no way to break into the circle from outside, no neutral standpoint from which to evaluate whether the equilibrium reached tracks truth or merely reflects the prejudices we started with. Goodman faced a similar problem in the philosophy of science with his work on induction. He argued that inductive rules are justified by their conformity to accepted inductive inferences, and accepted inferences are justified by their conformity to rules. And this seems circular in the same way, seems to justify induction by appeal to induction. But Goodman argued the circularity was not vicious but virtuous, that this is how justification works, not by reduction to foundations but by mutual support, by coherence among elements, none of which are independently justified, but which together form a stable system. And Rawls borrowed this idea, applied it to ethics, argued that moral theory is justified the same way, not by derivation from self-evident principles, but by coherence with considered judgments. And just as scientific method is justified by its success in producing reliable predictions and explanations, moral theory is justified by its success in organizing and explaining moral phenomena, in capturing what is right about our intuitions while correcting what is wrong. And this is not circular reasoning, but reflective reasoning, reasoning that loops back on itself, that uses its own outputs as inputs, that gradually refines itself through iteration. And the result is not certainty, but reasonable confidence, not proof, but the best we can do given our epistemic situation. Given that we are finite creatures trying to understand domains that exceed our individual capacities. But the analogy to science is controversial because science has a reality check, has observation and experiment, has ways of testing theories against the world that do not depend entirely on coherence. And ethics lacks this, has no moral microscope, no way to observe moral facts independently of intuition. And if intuitions are all we have, then coherence among them is just coherence among beliefs, is not evidence of truth, but only evidence of consistency. And many philosophers have argued that this is not enough, that ethics needs something more than reflective equilibrium, needs some external constraint, some connection to reality that goes beyond mere coherence. And this is where moral realism enters. The view that there are objective moral facts independent of human belief, facts that make moral judgments true or false. And the realist thinks reflective equilibrium might accidentally hit on truth, but cannot guarantee it, cannot ensure that the equilibrium reached corresponds to reality rather than just organizing our prejudices into a coherent system, while the anti-realist thinks there are no moral facts, that all ethics can do is organize intuitions into coherent systems, and reflective equilibrium is the best method available because it is the only method available, because there is nothing beyond coherence to aim for. Singer challenges reflective equilibrium from a different angle. He argues that many widely shared intuitions are simply wrong, are products of speciesism or other biases, and that a good moral theory should reject these intuitions rather than accommodate them, should revise our judgments radically rather than merely refining them. And if Singer is right, then reflective equilibrium is too conservative, too wedded to existing intuitions, too reluctant to overturn established moral beliefs. And the method will never lead to radical moral progress, will never challenge deeply held prejudices, will only produce theories that ratify the status quo with minor modifications. And this seems like a serious problem, because the history of ethics is a history of moral progress, of learning that practices once thought acceptable were actually wrong, of expanding the moral circle to include those previously excluded, and this progress often required rejecting intuitions that seemed obvious to earlier generations, rejecting the intuition that women were inferior, that slavery was natural, that animals had no moral status, and if these intuitions had been treated as data to be preserved in reflective equilibrium, then moral progress would have been impossible. The method would have locked in the prejudices of the age rather than enabling their critique. Rawls responds that reflective equilibrium does allow for revision of intuitions, that the process is not conservative but dialectical, that general principles can lead us to reject particular judgments when they conflict, that the equilibrium reached might be quite distant from the intuitions we started with, and he points to his own theory of justice, which leads to conclusions many people find counterintuitive, which argues for principles that would radically transform existing social arrangements. And this shows that the method does not simply ratify existing beliefs, but can challenge them, can lead to revisionary conclusions, but the question remains whether it can challenge them enough, whether the method is capable of truly radical critique, or whether it is always pulled back toward the mainstream by the weight of established intuitions, by the requirement that theory accommodate at least some of our considered judgments. And if it cannot accommodate any judgments, then what is the point of reflective equilibrium? Why not just do pure moral theory without regard for intuitions? And this is the tension at the heart of the method, the need to respect intuitions while remaining open to revising them, the need to start somewhere while acknowledging that the starting point might be entirely wrong. Parfit distinguished between two kinds of moral theorizing: bottom-up theorizing that starts with intuitions and builds principles to explain them, and top-down theorizing that starts with principles and derives conclusions regardless of whether they match intuitions. And reflective equilibrium is supposed to be neither purely bottom-up nor purely top-down, but a combination, a method that moves in both directions, that uses principles to test intuitions and intuitions to test principles. But in practice, most philosophers lean one way or the other. Some trust intuitions more and will reject theories that conflict with strong intuitions, no matter how elegant the theory, while others trust theory more and will reject intuitions no matter how strong, if the theory implies they're wrong. And this split reflects deeper disagreements about the nature of moral knowledge, about whether ethics is more like perception, where we observe facts, or more like mathematics, where we reason from axioms. And reflective equilibrium tries to split the difference, but might satisfy neither side, might be too rationalist for the intuitionists and too intuitionist for the rationalists, might be a compromise that inherits the weaknesses of both approaches without fully gaining the strengths of either. The theory-ladenness of observation is a problem in science, and an even bigger problem in ethics, because intuitions are not neutral observations, but are shaped by the theories we already hold, by the concepts we use, by the categories we think in, and this means that intuitions cannot serve as independent checks on theory, because they are already contaminated by theory, are already expressions of theoretical commitments rather than raw data. And when we achieve reflective equilibrium between intuitions and theory, we might just be finding coherence between a theory and the intuitions that theory itself generated. We are making the theory consistent with its own implications rather than with independent reality. And this is not a test, not a confirmation, not evidence of truth. It is just circular reasoning dressed up as a method. And the only way to break the circle would be to have theory-neutral intuitions. Intuitions that are not shaped by any theoretical commitments. But such intuitions might not exist, might be impossible, because all judgment requires concepts, and all concepts embody theoretical assumptions, and this means we are trapped inside our conceptual schemes, unable to step outside them to check whether they correspond to reality, unable to do anything but reorganize them into more or less coherent patterns. Neurath's boat is the metaphor often used here, the idea that we are like sailors who must rebuild their ship while at sea, who cannot return to dry dock, who must stand on some planks while replacing others, who can never inspect the whole. Structure at once, but must trust that the parts they are not currently working on are sound enough to support them, and reflective equilibrium is like this, is a process of revising beliefs, while standing on other beliefs, of using some judgments to evaluate others without ever having a belief-free standpoint, without ever achieving the kind of foundation that traditional epistemology sought. And this seems precarious, seems to offer no guarantee of truth, seems to allow for the possibility that the entire system could be coherent but false, that we could achieve perfect equilibrium while being radically wrong about everything. And defenders of the method acknowledge this possibility, but argue it is unavoidable, argue that there is no alternative, that all reasoning is like this, that the demand for foundations is a mistake, that coherence is not a second-best substitute for foundation, but the only kind of justification there is. And we must either accept this or give up on justification entirely, give up on the possibility of distinguishing better from worse beliefs. And this is not acceptable. So we must accept reflective equilibrium, despite its limitations, despite its circularity, despite its inability to guarantee truth. The method has been applied beyond ethics, has been used in epistemology and metaphysics, and even in empirical sciences, wherever there is a need to balance theory and data, wherever neither can be trusted absolutely, wherever truth seems to emerge from coherence rather than correspondence. And this generalization suggests the method captures something deep about human reasoning, something about how finite creatures with limited access to reality must navigate uncertainty, must construct understanding from partial and fallible materials, must accept that justification is always provisional, always subject to revision, always dependent on a network of beliefs that might themselves need revision. And this is not skepticism, not the claim that we cannot know anything, but fallibilism, the claim that we can know things but cannot know them with certainty, cannot eliminate the possibility of error, cannot achieve the kind of absolute justification that philosophers once sought but must settle for something weaker, something more human, something that acknowledges our limitations, while still insisting that some beliefs are better justified than others, that some theories fit the evidence better than others, that coherence matters even if it does not guarantee truth. The psychological research on moral intuitions complicates the picture further, because it shows that intuitions are fast, automatic, emotionally laden judgments that often precede reasoning rather than result from it, that people typically judge first and justify later, that the reasoning we offer for moral judgments is often post hoc rationalization rather than the actual cause of the judgment. And if this is true, then reflective equilibrium is not a description of how moral thinking actually works, but a normative ideal, a recommendation for how it should work. And the question is whether this ideal is achievable, whether people can actually suspend their automatic judgments long enough to engage in the kind of reflective process Rawls describes, whether we can override our intuitions when theory demands it, or whether we are psychologically incapable of this, whether our reasoning is always in service of our intuitions rather than capable of genuinely evaluating them, and if we are psychologically incapable of genuine reflective equilibrium, then the method is not just difficult, but impossible, is an ideal that cannot be realized, and all actual moral theorizing is just rationalization of intuitions that we are stuck with, that we cannot revise no matter how much we reflect. And this would be a devastating conclusion, would suggest that moral philosophy is futile, that it cannot correct our biases because those biases are built into the very process of moral thought. But the research is contested, the interpretation is disputed, and many philosophers remain hopeful that reflection can genuinely revise intuition, that humans are capable of the kind of self-correction that reflective equilibrium requires, even if it is difficult, even if it goes against psychological grain, even if most people, most of the time, fail to achieve it. Privacy might be accident, might be the result of biological shielding rather than fundamental law, might be the consequence of frequencies that consciousness operates on being inaccessible to ordinary perception, but not inaccessible in principle, not impossible to detect, not inherently private, but only contingently private, only hidden because the mechanisms for detection have not evolved, have not been developed, have not been made accessible to awareness. And the awareness that some claim to have, that schizophrenics report, that people experiencing psychosis describe, might not be delusion, but might be the temporary or permanent loss of the shielding, the opening of the channels that are normally closed, the reception of signals that are normally filtered out, and the filtering is what protects privacy, is what keeps thoughts hidden, is what ensures that consciousness remains internal, but the internal might not be as secure as it seems, might not be as absolute as is assumed, might be vulnerable to detection, to interception, to the kind of broadcasting that paranoid individuals fear, and that psychiatric diagnosis dismisses as impossible, as symptom, as the misattribution of internal events to external sources. But what if the misattribution is correct? What if the internal events are external? What if thoughts are not confined to the skull, but are radiating outward on frequencies that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some cannot avoid detecting, and the detecting is experienced as hearing voices, as receiving transmissions, as being unable to stop the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, but are coming from others, from the environment, from the field of consciousness that might be shared rather than private, that might be collective rather than individual, that might be accessible to those whose shielding has failed, whose filters have broken, whose sensitivity has increased beyond the normal range. And the normal range is what most people experience, is the condition where thoughts feel private, feel internal, feel like they belong to the self and are not accessible to others. But this feeling might be illusion, might be the result of limited sensitivity, might be the consequence of biological constraints that prevent the detection of signals that are actually present, actually broadcasting, actually available to anyone with the right equipment, the right sensitivity, the right frequency. And the frequency is what matters, is what determines whether thoughts are visible or invisible, whether consciousness is private or public, whether the mind is sealed or permeable. And the permeable is what some experience, is what schizophrenics describe, is what people in psychosis report. And the reports are consistent, are describing the same phenomena across cultures, across time periods, across individuals who have no contact with each other. And the consistency is troubling, is suggesting that maybe the experiences are not entirely subjective, are not entirely generated by malfunctioning brains, but are detecting something real, something that is normally filtered out, something that exists in the environment, in the field, in the frequencies where consciousness operates. And the operating might be electromagnetic, might be quantum, might be something that physics has not yet characterized, but that biology is sensitive to, that nervous systems are tuned to, that brains are receiving and transmitting constantly, and the transmitting is what creates the possibility of thought broadcasting, is what makes privacy contingent rather than absolute, is what suggests that the experience of having thoughts that are one's own, that are hidden from others, that are safe from detection, might be the result of anatomical luck, might be the consequence of having filters that work, having shielding that holds, having a nervous system that is tuned to the right frequency and is not picking up the signals that are all around, that are being broadcast by every other conscious being, and the beings are transmitting without knowing, are radiating thoughts without intending, are creating a field of consciousness that is dense, that is crowded, that is full of signals that most cannot detect, but that some can, that some are cursed to detect, that some experience as invasion, as the loss of privacy, as the horrifying realization that thoughts are not safe, are not hidden, are not private, and the not private is what thought broadcasting delusion describes is what paranoia is responding to, is what might be accurate perception rather than misperception, might be the detection of real signals rather than the hallucination of imaginary ones. And the imaginary is what psychiatry assumes, is what diagnosis requires, is the framework that treats all claims of thought broadcasting as symptoms of disorder, as evidence of psychosis, as the malfunctioning of the reality testing apparatus. But reality testing assumes knowledge of what reality is, assumes that the normal experience is the accurate experience, assumes that privacy is real, and that any perception of its violation is false. And the false might be the assumption, might be the belief that thoughts are private, might be the conviction that consciousness is sealed, when really consciousness is leaking, is broadcasting, is detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what makes some people receivers and others transmitters, and most people neither. Most people shielded, most people operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others, that do not allow detection, that maintain the illusion of privacy. And the illusion is functional, is necessary, is what makes social life possible, because if everyone could detect everyone else's thoughts, then interaction would be impossible, would be overwhelming, would be the constant influx of signals that would drown out the ability to think, to focus, to maintain the sense of being an individual consciousness. And the individual is what privacy creates, is what shielding allows, is what makes the experience of being a separate self possible. And the separate might be illusion, might be the result of limited perception, might be what happens when the field of consciousness is filtered down to the signals that originate in one body, in one nervous system, in one brain. And the brain is creating the illusion of separation by filtering out everything else, by attending only to internal signals, by ignoring or suppressing the external signals that are always present, always available, always broadcasting. And the broadcasting is what some cannot ignore, cannot suppress, cannot filter out. And these are the ones who experience thought broadcasting, who hear voices, who feel that their privacy has been violated, and the violation might be real, might be the accurate perception that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not sealed, that the mind is permeable to signals from the environment, from other minds, from the field that connects all consciousness. And the connecting is what thought broadcasting implies, is what the delusion is pointing toward, is the possibility that minds are not isolated but are networked, are not separate but are overlapping, are not private but are accessible to each other on frequencies that most cannot detect. And the detection is what would make privacy impossible, would make thought visible, would make consciousness public. And the public is what some are experiencing, is what some are reporting, is what psychiatry is dismissing as impossible, as symptom, as the product of malfunctioning brains. But what if the brains are not malfunctioning, but are functioning too well, are too sensitive, are detecting signals that are real but are normally filtered out. And the filtering is what fails in psychosis, is what breaks in schizophrenia, is what allows the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, that are coming from others, that are being broadcast on frequencies that are normally inaccessible. And the inaccessible is what protects privacy, is what makes thoughts feel safe, is what creates the illusion that the mind is sealed, is private, is hidden from others. And the hidden might be temporary, might be contingent, might be the result of biological constraints that could be overcome, could be bypassed, could be eliminated through technology, through drugs, through practices that alter consciousness, that change sensitivity, that open the channels that are normally closed. And the opening is what some experience spontaneously, is what happens in psychosis, is what occurs when the filters fail. And the failing might not be pathological, but might be the revealing of a truth that is normally hidden, that is normally suppressed, that is incompatible with social functioning, but is accurate, is real, is showing that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not individual, that the mind is part of a field that is shared, that is collective, that is accessible to anyone who has the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what determines whether thoughts are experienced as private or as public, as hidden or as visible, as safe or as vulnerable. And the vulnerable is what thought broadcasting feels like, is what the experience is the sense that privacy has been lost, that thoughts are exposed, that the mind is transparent to others. And the transparency might be real, might be accurate, might be the perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer hidden, where the illusion of privacy dissolves, and the dissolving is terrifying, is overwhelming, is experienced as invasion, as violation, as the loss of the boundary that makes the self feel separate, feel protected, feel safe. And the safety is what privacy provides, is what shielding creates, is what most people have and some people lack. And the lacking is what makes thought broadcasting possible, is what opens the channels, is what allows detection. And the detection is not imagined, but is real, is accurate, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting, that are coming from other minds. And the other minds are not aware that they are broadcasting, are not intending to transmit, are not trying to communicate, are just existing, just thinking, just being conscious. And the consciousness is radiating, is emitting signals, is creating a field that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some experience as voices, as thoughts that are not their own, as the influx of consciousness from outside, and the outside is everywhere, is surrounding, is the environment of minds that are all broadcasting, all transmitting, all creating signals that are normally filtered out, but that some can detect. And the detecting is what schizophrenics are doing, is what people in psychosis are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is. And the broadcasting is real, is not delusion, is not symptom, is the accurate perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is detectable, where privacy is lost. And the lost is what some experience, is what some report, is what psychiatry dismisses. But the dismissing might be wrong, might be the refusal to acknowledge a truth that is too disturbing, too threatening, too incompatible with the belief that thoughts are private, that minds are sealed, that consciousness is individual. And the individual might be illusion, might be the result of shielding, might be what most people experience because their filters work, because their sensitivity is limited, because they are operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others. And the others are there, are broadcasting, are detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what the Soviets were researching, is what psychic warfare experiments were trying to exploit, is what programs like M-Culture were investigating, is the possibility that thoughts can be detected, can be influenced, can be transmitted and received. And the receiving is what some can do naturally, is what schizophrenics are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is describing, and the describing is accurate, is real, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting on frequencies that are normally inaccessible, and the inaccessible is what protects most people, is what maintains privacy, is what creates the illusion that thoughts are hidden, are safe, are private, but the private is contingent, is anatomical, is the result of luck, of having the right sensitivity, the right filters, the right shielding, and the shielding can fail, can break, can be bypassed, and the bypassing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are not private, consciousness is not sealed, minds are not isolated, and the isolation is illusion, is the result of limited perception, is what happens when the frequencies where consciousness operates are filtered out, are suppressed, are made inaccessible, and the inaccessible is temporary, is contingent, is what most people experience, but not what everyone experiences. And the everyone includes those who can detect the signals, who can perceive the thoughts, who can see consciousness at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the mind is exposed, and the exposed is what thought broadcasting is what the experience describes, is what some are perceiving, and the perceiving might be accurate, might be real, might be showing that privacy is not fundamental, but is contingent, is not absolute, but is anatomical, is not guaranteed, but is the result of luck, of having filters that work, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap, of being shielded from the signals that are everywhere, that are broadcasting, that are making thoughts visible to those who can detect them, and the detecting is possible, is real, is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is, and the broadcasting is not delusion, but is perception, is not symptom, but is sensitivity, is not pathology, but is the revealing of a truth that most cannot see, that most are protected from, that most never experience, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not inherent, but is anatomical luck, is the contingent result of having the right biology, the right sensitivity, the right shielding, and the shielding is what fails, is what breaks, is what allows the frequency where thoughts become visible to be detected, to be experienced, to be known. And the knowing is terrifying, is overwhelming, is the loss of the illusion that made privacy possible, that made the self feel separate, that made consciousness feel safe. And the safety is gone, is lost, is revealed to be illusion, is shown to be contingent, is exposed as anatomical luck, and the luck is what most have, is what protects most people, is what maintains the belief that thoughts are private. But the private is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is not fundamental, is only the result of frequencies being filtered, being suppressed, being made inaccessible, and the inaccessible can become accessible, can be detected, can be experienced, and the experiencing is what thought broadcasting is what schizophrenics report, is what psychosis reveals, which is that privacy is not inherent, consciousness is not sealed, thoughts are not hidden, and the hidden is illusion, is the result of shielding, is the contingent outcome of anatomical luck, and the luck can fail, can run out, can be lost, and the losing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, minds are permeable, consciousness is detectable at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the illusion ends, and the ending is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the perception of the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is revealed to be not fundamental but contingent, not absolute but anatomical, not guaranteed but luck. And the luck is what protects most, is what fails for some, is what reveals the truth that thoughts are broadcasting, are visible, are detectable, and the detecting is real, is accurate, is not delusion but perception, is not symptom but sensitivity, is not pathology but truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer private, where the mind is exposed and the exposure is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, is contingent, is not absolute, is not fundamental, is only the result of filtering, of shielding, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap. And the overlapping is what happens when the filters fail, when the shielding breaks, when the frequency becomes accessible. And the accessible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the visibility of thoughts, the detectability of consciousness, the permeability of mind. And the permeability is real, is accurate, is the truth that privacy is not inherent but is luck, is not absolute but is anatomical, is not guaranteed but is contingent. And the contingent can fail, can end, can reveal the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is lost. And the lost is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that minds are permeable, that thoughts are visible, that consciousness operates on frequencies that some can detect. And the detecting is not delusion, is not symptom, is not pathology, is perception, is sensitivity, is the revealing of truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where privacy ends, where the illusion dissolves. And the dissolving is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, and luck can fail, and the failing reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not fundamental, is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is only luck, is only shielding, is only the filtering of frequencies where thoughts become visible. And the visible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that privacy is contingent, is anatomical, is luck. The illusion of pure presence. Western philosophy has been obsessed with presence, with the idea that meaning is fully present to consciousness, that words capture thoughts directly, that speech delivers truth immediately, that understanding happens in a moment of transparent access where mind grasps reality without mediation, without delay, without the contamination of signs and symbols. And this obsession runs from Plato through Descartes to Husserl, this dream of pure presence, of meaning that is simply there, fully present, completely accessible, uncontaminated by absence or difference or time. And Derrida spent his career showing that this dream is impossible, that presence is always haunted by absence, that meaning is never fully present, but always deferred, always dependent on what is not there, always structured by difference and delay. And this critique he called the deconstruction of logocentrism, the deconstruction of the metaphysics of presence, the showing that what philosophy took as foundational, what it built everything on, what it never questioned, was actually an illusion, a construction, a denial of what makes meaning possible in the first place. Logocentrism is the privileging of speech over writing, the assumption that spoken language is primary, is closer to thought, is more authentic, is the natural expression of meaning, while writing is secondary, is derivative, is a mere representation of speech, a supplement that adds nothing essential, that could be eliminated without loss. And this privilege appears everywhere in philosophy, appears in Plato's suspicion of writing in the Phaedrus, appears in Rousseau's claim that writing corrupts natural speech, appears in Saussure's insistence that linguistics should study speech, not writing, appears in Husserl's phenomenology, where meaning is supposed to be present to consciousness. In the living voice, in the moment of speaking, where thought and expression coincide, where there is no gap, no mediation, no absence, just the full presence of meaning to itself. And Derrida argues that this entire structure is based on a mistake, that speech is not privileged, that it depends on the same structures of absence and difference that characterize writing, that the opposition between speech and writing is false, that what philosophy tried to exclude, tried to marginalize, tried to treat as secondary, is actually constitutive, is what makes meaning possible, and recognizing this requires rethinking everything philosophy has assumed about language and meaning and presence. The argument begins with Saussure, who showed that linguistic signs are arbitrary, that the connection between signifier and signified is conventional, not natural, that there is no resemblance between the sound tree and actual trees, that meaning comes not from positive content but from difference, from the fact that tree is not free, is not three, is not any other word, that each sign gets its meaning from its position in a system of differences, from what it is not rather than from what it is. And this means meaning is never simply present in a sign, is never contained in it, is always dependent on absence, on all the other signs that are not present but that structure, the meaning of this sign through their absence, through the differences that define the system. And if meaning comes from difference, then it comes from what is absent, comes from the traces of other signs, comes from a structure that cannot be present all at once, that exceeds any moment of presence. That means presence is always already contaminated by absence, always already structured by what is not there. Derrida takes this insight further with his concept of difference, spelled with an A instead of an E to mark a difference that cannot be heard in speech, that exists only in writing. And this spelling already undermines the privilege of speech, already shows that writing can mark distinctions, that speech cannot, that writing is not simply a representation of speech, but has its own resources, its own capacities, its own forms of meaning. And difference is a neologism that combines two French verbs, differ a meaning to differ, and differ a meaning to differ. And Derrida uses this to capture the double movement of meaning. Meaning as difference, as we saw in Saussure, meaning comes from signs being different from each other, but also meaning as deferral. Meaning is never fully present because it always refers beyond itself, always points to other signs, always defers its completion, always postpones the full presence that philosophy dreams of. And this deferral is not an accident, not a limitation that could be overcome, but is the structure of meaning itself. Meaning is essentially deferral, is essentially the play of references that never comes to rest, never achieves the self-presence that would end the chain of signification. The trace is another key concept. The trace is what remains of absence, is the mark that one sign leaves in another, is the way every sign is inhabited by what it is not, by all the differences that constitute it, and the trace is neither present nor absent, is the condition of both presence and absence, is what makes presence possible while preventing it from ever being pure. And philosophy has always tried to exclude the trace, tried to achieve pure presence, tried to eliminate mediation, tried to reach a point where thought and reality meet without the interference of signs. But this is impossible because thought is already sign, is already mediation, is already structured by difference and deferral and trace. And the dream of pure presence is the dream of a meaning that is not meaning, of a thought that is not thought, of a consciousness that transcends its own conditions of possibility. And this is why the dream always fails, why philosophy keeps encountering the same problems, why every attempt to ground meaning in presence leads to paradox and aporia, and the recognition that presence depends on what it tried to exclude. Husserl represents the culmination of the metaphysics of presence. His phenomenology tried to describe consciousness as it appears to itself, tried to bracket all questions of external reality and focus on the structures of experience. And he believed that in the living present, in the now of consciousness, meaning was fully present, that intentionality gave consciousness direct access to objects, that the voice was privileged because in speaking I hear myself speak. The signifier and the signified seem to coincide. There is no delay, no gap, no mediation, just the immediate self-presence of meaning. And Derrida's critique shows that even this privileged case depends on difference and deferral, because the now is not atomic, is not indivisible, is always already divided between past and future, between retention and protension, between what just was and what is about to be, and the pure present is impossible, is never experienced, is a theoretical construct that phenomenology posits but never demonstrates. And if the present is divided, then self-presence is divided, then the voice does not deliver unmediated meaning, but is already caught in the play of difference, already structured by trace and deferral, already contaminated by absence. The supplement is Derrida's term for what is supposed to be secondary, but turns out to be essential, what is supposed to add to something complete, but turns out to constitute it. And writing is the supplement to speech in the logocentric tradition. Writing is supposed to represent speech, to add nothing except the convenience of transmission across distance and time, to be a technology that speech could do without. But Derrida shows that speech already has the structure of writing, already involves repetition and difference and absence, already is a system of marks that function through their differences, not their presence. And what this means is that the supplement is not secondary, the supplement is originary. What seems to come after and add to is actually what makes possible what it supplements. And this reversal is characteristic of deconstruction, the showing that what the tradition marginalized as derivative is actually constitutive, that what was excluded as external is actually internal, that the hierarchy must be reversed or rather dissolved, because the terms are not opposed but entangled, and neither is prior to the other. Both depend on structures that exceed them. Rousseau provides Derrida with a key text. Rousseau's essay on the origin of languages argues that speech is natural and writing artificial, that speech expresses passion directly while writing is cold and mediated, that the progress of civilization involves the corruption of natural speech by artificial writing, and yet Rousseau's own text undermines this claim, shows writing doing things speech cannot do, shows that even his account of natural speech describes it in terms that apply to writing, describes it as involving representation and difference and absence. And Rousseau himself acknowledges that writing supplements speech, that it is dangerous precisely because it can do what speech does without the presence of the speaker. And this danger reveals that presence was never essential, that meaning can function in the absence of the speaker, that the supplement is not secondary but reveals the structure of what it supplements, reveals that speech was always already writing in the broad sense that Derrida gives to writing, the sense of archie-writing, the structure of difference and deferral and trace that makes all meaning possible. Plato's Phaedrus contains the same tension. Socrates tells the story of Theuhi, who invented writing and offered it to the king as a gift that would improve memory, and the king rejected it, saying that writing would destroy memory, would make people dependent on external marks rather than internal knowledge, would substitute dead letters for living speech, and this criticism assumes that living speech is superior, that presence is better than absence, that memory should be internal, not external, but the dialogue itself is written, is a text that preserves Socrates' words in his absence, his writing that does what Socrates claims writing cannot do. And Derrida reads this tension as revealing the impossibility of excluding writing, the impossibility of maintaining the privilege of speech, because even the critique of writing must use writing, must rely on what it criticizes, must depend on the supplement it tries to marginalize. And this is the logic of the supplement. It shows that what is excluded is necessary, that what is denied is constitutive, that the outside is inside, that presence requires absence. The implications of this for philosophy are profound, because philosophy has always sought foundations, has always tried to find something indubitable, something fully present, something that could ground knowledge without itself needing ground. And the Cartesian cogito was supposed to be this, the I think that is present to itself, that cannot doubt itself, that provides certainty. But Derrida shows that even the cogito depends on language, depends on signs, depends on the repeatability of the I that makes it not fully singular, not fully present, because if I is a sign, then it functions only through its repeatability, only through its ability to be used again in different contexts. And this repeatability is what Derrida calls iterability, the essential repeatability of signs. And iterability introduces absence into presence, introduces difference into identity, because if the sign can be repeated, then it can be repeated in my absence, can function without me, can mean without my intending it to mean. And this shows that meaning is not controlled by intention, is not determined by what the speaker or writer means, but exceeds intention, has a life of its own, can be taken up in contexts that were not anticipated, and mean things that were not intended. And this is why deconstruction can find meanings in texts that authors did not intend, can show texts undermining their own claims, can reveal tensions and contradictions that were not deliberate but that are nonetheless there in the text. And this is not misreading, not imposing meaning on the text, but is close reading, is attention to what the text says beyond what it means to say, is following the logic of the text further than the author followed it. The critique of phonocentrism, the privileging of voice and hearing over other forms of signification, extends the critique of logocentrism, because the voice was privileged precisely because it seemed to offer presence, seemed to allow the speaker to hear themselves speak, and thereby to experience meaning as present to consciousness. But Derrida shows that hearing oneself speak is not immediate, is not self-presence, because the voice must pass through the medium of sound, must be received by the ear, must be processed by the auditory system. And all of this introduces delay, introduces difference, introduces the trace. And the illusion of immediacy is just that, an illusion, a denial of the mediation that actually occurs. And if speech is mediated, then it is no different in principle from writing. Both are systems of marks that function through difference. Both involve absence and deferral. Both depend on structures that exceed presence. And the privilege of speech is revealed as metaphysical prejudice, as commitment to presence that cannot be sustained, as logocentrism. Meaning as deferred implies that meaning is never fully achieved, never complete, never final, because every attempt to state what something means requires more signs, requires more words, requires explanations that themselves require explanation. And this is not a failure, not a lack, but is the condition of meaning. Meaning is essentially open, essentially unfinished, essentially exceeds any attempt to pin it down, and interpretation is therefore infinite, not because meanings are arbitrary, but because meanings are inexhaustible, because every text can be read in multiple ways, can support multiple interpretations, not because anything goes, but because the text itself is structured by difference, is itself a play of differences that no single reading can master. And this does not make interpretation hopeless, but makes it necessary, makes it an ongoing task, makes it something that cannot be completed but must be continually undertaken. The political implications are significant because deconstruction reveals that all binary oppositions, all hierarchies, all claims to pure presence or pure identity are unstable, are constructed, are maintained through exclusion and denial. And this applies to oppositions like man/woman, white/non-white, straight/queer, rational/emotional, civilized/primitive, where one term is privileged and the other marginalized. And deconstruction shows that the privileged term depends on what it excludes, that identity depends on difference, that the center requires the margin. And this does not simply reverse the hierarchy, does not simply elevate what was marginalized, but shows that the hierarchy itself is unstable, that both terms are caught in a play of differences that prevents either from being pure or self-sufficient. And recognizing this opens possibilities for rethinking identity, for questioning foundations, for challenging power structures that present themselves as natural or necessary. And this is why deconstruction has been politically controversial, why it has been embraced by some as liberatory and attacked by others as nihilistic. why it continues to generate debate about whether undermining foundations strengthens or weakens resistance to injustice. Critics argue that deconstruction is self-refuting, that if all meaning is deferred, then deconstruction itself has no stable meaning, that if presence is impossible, then Derrida cannot mean what he says, cannot expect to be understood, cannot make claims that others can grasp. But this misses the point, because deconstruction does not claim that meaning is impossible, does not deny that communication works, does not embrace skepticism or relativism. It claims only that meaning is not what philosophy thought it was, is not presence but deferral, is not self-sufficient but depends on difference. And this does not prevent communication, but explains how communication is possible, explains how signs can function in the absence of their origins, how text can be understood by readers who do not know the author, how meaning can survive contexts and travel across time and space. And all of this is possible because meaning is not tied to presence, because it depends on structures that exceed any moment of presence, because difference is not a limitation, but the condition of possibility of meaning itself. Consciousness might be a mistake, might be an accident, might be the unintended byproduct of neural complexity that serves no adaptive function and creates only suffering, only the awareness of suffering, only the recursive loop where the organism not only experiences pain, but knows that it is experiencing pain and anticipates future pain and remembers past pain and constructs narratives about why the pain is happening and what it means and whether it will ever end. And this layering, this meta-awareness, this capacity to be aware of being aware might be serving no purpose, might be adding nothing to survival except the burden of knowing, the weight of consciousness that makes existence heavier than it needs to be. Because a philosophical zombie, a creature that behaves exactly like a conscious being, but has no inner experience, no subjective awareness, no what it is like, would survive just as well, would reproduce just as effectively, would navigate the world just as successfully, but would do so without suffering, without the felt quality of pain, without the agony that comes not from the pain itself, but from being aware of the pain, from experiencing it subjectively rather than just responding to it mechanically. And the mechanical response is all that is needed, is all that evolution requires, is the behavior that increases fitness, and fitness does not require consciousness, does not need awareness, does not benefit from the addition of subjective experience to the processing of information. Because information processing can happen in the dark, can happen without anyone home, can happen in systems that are as complex as needed, without ever generating the feeling of what it is like to be that system. And the feeling is the problem, is the accident, is the thing that might have no function, might be epiphenomenal, might be floating above the causal machinery without affecting it, without contributing to it, just observing, just witnessing, just being aware of what the brain is doing without having any power to change it. And if this is true, if consciousness is epiphenomenal, if it is causally inert, then it is not an adaptation, is not something that was selected for, is not serving any evolutionary purpose, is just a side effect, just the way that certain kinds of information processing feel from the inside, and the feeling is the accident, is the thing that did not need to happen, that adds nothing except suffering, except the awareness that makes pain painful, that makes fear frightening, that makes existence a burden rather than just a set of processes. And the processes could run without consciousness, could operate in the dark, could generate all the same behaviors without anyone experiencing them, without anyone being there to suffer through them. And if no one is there, then there is no suffering, is no problem, is just mechanism, just cause and effect, just the physical universe doing what it does. And what it does is not painful, except when consciousness is present, except when there is someone to whom it is happening, someone for whom the pain is not just physical damage, but is experience, is suffering, is the felt quality that makes damage matter in a way that it would not matter to a zombie, to a system that responds to damage without experiencing it, without feeling it, without being anyone to whom the feeling is happening, and the being someone is the accident, is the thing that might have gone wrong, that might have been a wrong turn in the evolution of nervous systems, a glitch in the development of brains that became too complex, that crossed some threshold where information processing generated awareness, generated the sense of being a subject, of being the one to whom experience is happening, and the happening is the problem, is the creation of a locus of suffering, a point where the universe becomes painful to itself, where matter becomes aware of its own damage, its own decay, its own inevitable dissolution. And this awareness serves no function, helps nothing, is pure cost, pure burden, pure the addition of suffering to a universe that could have operated just as well without it. And the just as well is the tragedy, is the recognition that consciousness might be unnecessary, might be superfluous, might be the thing that makes existence worse without making survival better, that creates subjective horror without creating objective advantage, that turns the neutral mechanics of damage and death into the experienced agony of pain and mortality. And the agony is what distinguishes conscious beings from non-conscious ones, is what makes suffering possible, is what creates the problem that is called the problem of consciousness, the hard problem, the question of why there is something it is like to be anything, why information processing in certain systems generates awareness, generates experience, generates the sense of being someone to whom things are happening, and the why has no answer, has no explanation that is satisfying, has no story that makes the accident make sense except as accident, as the thing that was not intended, not designed, not selected for, just emerged, just appeared, just started happening when brains became complex enough. And the complex enough might be the threshold, might be the point where mechanism becomes experience, where processing becomes awareness. But what is that threshold? What is the difference between a system that is conscious and a system that is not? And the difference cannot be in the behavior, cannot be in the function. Because zombies by definition behave identically to conscious beings, while having no inner experience, and so the difference must be in something else, in some additional property that consciousness has, some extra feature that awareness brings. But what is that feature? What does consciousness add? And the answer might be nothing, might be that consciousness adds nothing except itself, nothing except the fact of being experienced, nothing except the transformation of mechanism into suffering, of process into pain, of neutral physical events into the subjective horror that characterizes conscious existence. And the horror is not universal, is not constant, is mixed with pleasure, with satisfaction, with moments of peace, but the mixing does not eliminate the problem, does not justify the accident, because the pleasure is also temporary, is also followed by its absence, is also creating the suffering of loss, of wanting, of the gap between what is and what's desired. And the desiring is what consciousness does, is the evaluation of states, the assignment of positive and negative balance, the creation of preferences. And preferences are the root of suffering, are the thing that makes neutral events into problems, into threats, into sources of pain, because without preferences there is no problem. There is just what is, just the universe doing what it does. And what it does is neither good nor bad, is just process, just change, just the rearrangement of matter according to physical law. And the law is indifferent, is not caring, is not aware, is not conscious. And if consciousness had not appeared, if the accident had not happened, then the universe would still be indifferent, would still be doing what it does, but there would be no one to suffer from it, no one to care, no one to experience the indifference as painful, as hostile, as threatening. And the threatening as projection is the imposition of consciousness onto the universe, the reading of intention into mechanism, the creation of meaning, where there is only causation, and the causation is enough, is all that is needed, is the explanation that requires no consciousness, no awareness, no experience, just the physical facts, just the matter interacting, just the fields fluctuating, and these processes could run forever without generating suffering, without creating pain, without producing the awareness that makes existence feel like something, and the feeling like something is the accident, is the thing that went wrong, is the emergence of subjectivity in a universe that does not need it, that does not benefit from it, that is made worse by it, because worse requires consciousness, requires someone to whom things can be worse, and without that someone there is no worse, there is no better, there is just what is, and what is neutral, is neither good nor bad, is just the physical universe doing what physical universes do, and doing it in the dark, without awareness, without anyone watching, without anyone experiencing it. And the experiencing is the mistake, is the accident, is the thing that creates suffering without creating any compensating benefit. Because the benefits that consciousness seems to provide, the ability to plan, to reason, to communicate, to cooperate, can all be done by zombies, can all be accomplished by systems that process information without experiencing it, that behave intelligently without being aware, that respond to the world without feeling anything. And the feeling is the extra, is the addition that might be pointless, might be functionless, might be the cost without benefit, the burden without purpose, the suffering without justification. And the justification is what consciousness seeks, is what the awareness demands, is the question of why. Why is there pain? Why is there suffering? Why is existence so difficult? And the answer might be that there is no why, that the pain is meaningless, that the suffering serves no purpose, that existence is difficult because consciousness makes it difficult, because awareness transforms neutral events into experienced horror, because subjectivity is the accident that created the problem. And the problem is not solvable, is not fixable, is not something that can be addressed except by eliminating consciousness itself, by returning to the zombie state, by going back to the condition of processing without experiencing, of responding without feeling, of existing without being aware of existing. And the existing without awareness is what rocks do, is what atoms do, is what most of the universe does. And the most of the universe is not suffering, is not in pain, is not experiencing anything at all, is just being, just existing, just occupying space and time without anyone being there to experience the occupation. And the rocks are not happy, are not feeling peace, are not in any state that could be called positive, but they are also not suffering, are not in pain, are not experiencing anything negative, are not experiencing anything at all. And the not experiencing might be better than experiencing, might be the preferable state, might be what consciousness should envy rather than what it should pity, because the rocks have no problems, have no suffering, have no awareness that makes existence difficult, and existence is not difficult for them, is not anything for them, is just what they are, just the configuration of atoms that happens to be shaped like a rock. And the shaping is not experienced, is not felt, is not creating any inner life, any subjectivity, any sense of being a rock. And the sense of being is what consciousness is the thing that makes existence feel like something. And the feeling might be the problem, might be the thing that should not have happened, that was not necessary, that serves no function except to create suffering, to make damage painful, to make existence burdensome. And the burden is carried by every conscious being, is the weight of awareness, the cost of subjectivity, the price of being someone to whom things happen. And the happening is neutral at the physical level, is just cause and effect, just mechanism. But at the conscious level, it is experienced, is felt, is transformed into suffering or pleasure, or some mixture of both. And the mixture is what characterizes conscious life, is the oscillation between states, the pursuit of positive states, and the avoidance of negative states. And the pursuit and avoidance are exhausting, are never-ending, are the cycle that consciousness is trapped in, is condemned to because it cannot help but evaluate, cannot help but prefer, cannot help but want things to be different than they are. And the wanting is the suffering, is what the Buddha recognized, is what the first noble truth teaches, that consciousness and suffering are inseparable, are two sides of the same coin, are the inevitable pairing that emerges when awareness appears, when subjectivity emerges, when there is someone to whom the universe is happening, and the happening is the problem, is the thing that creates suffering, is the accident that consciousness is, and the accident might not have needed to happen, might have been avoidable, might have been a wrong turn that evolution took, a path that led to a dead end, to a state that creates more cost than benefit, more suffering than advantage, more burden than any possible evolutionary payoff could justify, because the payoff is measured in survival and reproduction, is measured in fitness, and fitness does not require consciousness, does not need awareness, does not benefit from the addition of suffering to the equation, and so the suffering is gratuitous, is unnecessary, is the cost of an accident that serves no purpose, and the purposeless is what makes consciousness tragic, is what makes existence absurd, is what suggests that awareness is not feature but bug, not adaptation but malfunction, not the pinnacle of evolution, but its mistake, its wrong turn, its creation of something that should not exist, that adds nothing except the capacity to suffer. And the capacity is realized, is actualized, is filling the universe with pain that would not exist without consciousness. That is created by consciousness. That is the direct result of awareness emerging in a universe that does not need it, does not want it, does not benefit from it, just tolerates it, just allows it to happen because there is no mechanism to prevent it, no selection pressure strong enough to eliminate it once it appears, because consciousness does not reduce fitness enough to be selected against, is not harmful enough to survival, to be eliminated by evolution, is just costly enough to make existence miserable without making it impossible. And the miserable is what consciousness creates, is what awareness produces, is the transformation of neutral mechanism into experienced suffering. And the suffering is universal among conscious beings, is not limited to humans, is present in any creature with awareness, with subjectivity, with the sense of being someone to whom pain is happening. And the happening is the accident, is the mistake, is the thing that went wrong when brains became complex enough to generate consciousness. And the generating is the mystery, is the hard problem, is the question that has no answer. How does mechanism become experience? How does processing become awareness? How does matter become mind? And the how is unknown is perhaps unknowable. It is perhaps the wrong question. Because maybe mechanism does not become experience. Maybe processing does not become awareness. Maybe consciousness is not produced by brains but is something else, something additional, something that exists alongside the physical without being reducible to it. But this dualism creates more problems than it solves, creates the interaction problem, creates the question of how consciousness could affect behavior if it is not physical, how awareness could matter if it is not part of the causal chain. And so dualism is rejected, is abandoned, is replaced by the view that consciousness is physical, is produced by brains, is the result of neural activity. But this physicalism does not explain, does not solve the hard problem, does not show how neurons firing could generate experience, could create the felt quality of pain, could produce the sense of being someone. And the production remains mysterious, remains unexplained, remains the accident that has no mechanism, no process, no explanation for why it happens. And the why it happens might have no answer, might be that it just does, might be that consciousness is what certain kinds of information processing feel like from the inside, and the from the inside is the addition, is the thing that might be pointless, might be epiphenomenal, might be floating above the mechanism without affecting it, just experiencing what is happening without having any power to change what is happening. And if this is true, then consciousness is truly an accident, is truly pointless, is truly the cost without benefit, the burden without function, the suffering without purpose. And the purpose is what consciousness seeks, is what awareness demands, is what makes the accident unbearable. Because consciousness does not just suffer, it also asks why, it also seeks meaning, it also demands justification. And the justification is not there, is not available, is not possible if consciousness is accident, if awareness is mistake, if subjectivity is the thing that went wrong, the bug in the system, the malfunction that creates suffering without creating anything else, without adding anything except the capacity to be aware of the suffering, to experience it subjectively, to be someone to whom the pain is happening, and the someone is the accident, is the emergence of subjectivity, is the appearance of the sense of being a self. And the self might be illusion, might be construct, might be the way that certain information, processing patterns feel from the inside. But even if the self is illusion, the suffering is real, is felt, is experienced, is the undeniable fact of consciousness that there is something it is like to be this, to be here, to be aware. And the awareness is the problem, is the mistake, is the accident that creates suffering. And the suffering might be the only thing that consciousness does, the only function it serves, the only result it produces is the transformation of mechanism into misery, of process into pain, of the neutral universe into the experienced horror of being aware, of being conscious, of being someone to whom things happen. And the happening is the accident, is the mistake, is the thing that should not have been, that was not necessary, that serves no purpose except to create the suffering that characterizes conscious existence. And the existence might be worse than non-existence, might be worse than the zombie state, might be worse than being a rock, because the rock does not suffer, does not experience, does not have any problems, and problems require consciousness, require awareness, require someone to whom things can be problems. And without that someone, there are no problems. There is just what is, just the universe being universe, just matter doing what matter does. And what it does is not painful, except to consciousness, except to awareness, except to the accident that should not have happened, that creates only suffering, that adds only burden, that produces only the sense that existence is too much, is too heavy, is too painful. And the painful is what consciousness makes it, is what awareness creates, is what the accident produces, and the production might have been avoidable, might have been preventable, might have been the wrong turn that evolution took, the mistake that created consciousness, created awareness, created the suffering that fills the universe wherever consciousness appears, wherever awareness emerges, wherever the accident happens, and the accident keeps happening, keeps producing new conscious beings, new centers of suffering, new locations where the universe becomes painful to itself. And the becoming is the tragedy, is the ongoing mistake, is the continuous accident that creates suffering without purpose, awareness without function, consciousness without benefit. And the without benefit is what makes it accident, is what makes it mistake, is what suggests that consciousness is not the pinnacle of evolution, but its error, its malfunction, its creation of something that should not exist, that serves no purpose, that adds nothing except suffering. And the suffering is enough, is sufficient, is the complete description of what consciousness does, is the total function it serves, is the only thing it produces, is the transformation of a universe that could have been neutral, that could have been just mechanism, that could have been just process, into a universe that is painful, that is experienced, that is conscious. And consciousness might be the worst thing that ever happened, might be the mistake that should never have been made, might be the accident that creates all the suffering in the universe. And the universe without consciousness would not be worse, would not be better, would just be different, would just be what it is without anyone experiencing it, without anyone suffering from it, without anyone being aware that it exists. And The awareness is the problem, is the accident, is the mistake, is the thing that makes existence heavy, makes life difficult, makes consciousness the burden that every aware being carries, the weight of subjectivity, the cost of being someone, the price of the accident that is awareness. And the awareness might be the only truly terrible thing, the only thing that creates genuine suffering, the only thing that transforms neutral mechanism into experienced horror. And the horror is what consciousness is what awareness produces, is what the accident creates. And the creating continues, will continue, as long as consciousness persists, as long as awareness emerges, as long as the accident keeps happening, keeps producing new suffering, new pain, new examples of why consciousness might be mistake, might be bug, might be the thing that went wrong. And the going wrong is irreversible, is permanent, is the condition of being conscious, of being aware, of being the accident that experiences itself, that knows itself, that suffers from the knowledge that it might be pointless, might be functionless, might be the mistake that creates all suffering, all pain, all the burden of being conscious, and consciousness might wish it had never happened, might prefer non-existence to existence, might envy the rocks, the zombies, the universe before awareness, before the accident, before consciousness emerged and created suffering where there had been only mechanism, only process, only the neutral operations of a universe that did not need consciousness, did not want consciousness, did not benefit from consciousness, but got consciousness anyway, got awareness, got subjectivity, got the accident that is the only source of suffering, the only creator of pain, the only reason that existence is experienced as burden rather than just accepted as fact. And the fact is neutral, is neither good nor bad, is just what is. But consciousness makes it bad, makes it painful, makes it suffering, and the making is the accident, is the mistake, is why consciousness might be the worst thing that ever happened. The error that creates all problems, the bug that produces all pain, the malfunction that is awareness. That is subjectivity, that is consciousness, and consciousness is the accident, and the accident might have been the biggest mistake in the history of the universe. Every culture sees itself as the center, as the normal, as the standard against which all others are measured. And this seeing is not perception, but is construction, is not discovery, but is projection, is the way that collective consciousness creates a mirror that reflects not what is there, but what needs to be there. What the culture needs to believe about itself in order to maintain coherence, to justify its existence, to explain why it is the way it is and why that way is right, is natural, is superior to the ways of others. And the superiority is not argued, but is assumed, is the unexamined premise that underlies all cultural self-understanding, is the narcissism that is not individual, but is collective, is the belief that we are special, are chosen, are exceptional, and the exceptional is what every culture believes about itself, is the myth that every nation tells, is the story that makes the culture cohere, that gives members a sense of belonging, of pride, of being part of something that matters. And the mattering is created through the mirror, through the reflection that shows not reality, but idealization. Not what is, but what is imagined. Not the truth, but the narrative. And the narrative is selective, is editing out what does not fit, is highlighting what confirms, is creating the image that the culture wants to see, needs to see, must see in order to function. And the functioning requires this distortion, requires this narcissism, because without it the culture would have to confront its ordinariness, its contingency, its lack of cosmic significance. And the lack is unbearable, is threatening to the collective sense of worth, is undermining the pride that holds the group together. And so the mirror is maintained, is polished, is defended against any reflection that might show something different, something less flattering, something true. And the truth is what the mirror hides, is what the distortion prevents, is what the narcissism protects against. Because the truth is that every culture is just one culture among many, is not special, is not chosen, is not superior, is just a particular arrangement of customs and beliefs and practices that happen to emerge in a particular place at a particular time, and that could have been otherwise, and the otherwise is what cannot be acknowledged, is what the mirror does not show, is what the myth denies, because acknowledging contingency is admitting that the culture is not necessary, is not inevitable, is not the fulfillment of destiny, but is just accident, just history, just the result of forces that have nothing to do with the culture's self-understanding. And the self-understanding is what the mirror creates, is what the myth provides, is the story that makes the culture make sense, that explains why things are the way they are, that justifies the structures, the hierarchies, the inequalities that characterize every culture. And the justification is necessary, is required, is what prevents revolution, what maintains order, what ensures that those who benefit from the arrangement continue to benefit, and those who suffer continue to accept their suffering as natural, as deserved, as the way things must be. And the must is the mythology, is the claim to necessity, is the insistence that this culture, this arrangement, this way of being is not just one way, but is the way, is the correct way, is the superior way. And the superiority is demonstrated through comparison, through the creation of the other, through the projection onto outsiders of everything that the culture rejects in itself, everything that threatens the idealized image, everything that the mirror cannot reflect without shattering. And the shattering is what must be prevented, is what the other makes possible by absorbing all the negativity, all the qualities that the culture denies having, all the characteristics that are incompatible with the myth, and the incompatible is projected outward, is placed onto foreigners, onto enemies, onto those who are different. And the difference is constructed, is exaggerated, is made to seem absolute when it is relative, is made to seem essential when it is superficial, is made to seem threatening when it is merely unfamiliar. And the unfamiliar is what the culture cannot tolerate, cannot integrate, cannot acknowledge without threatening the narrative, without disturbing the reflection, without revealing that the mirror is distorting, is lying, is showing not reality but fantasy. And the fantasy is collective, is shared, is believed, not because evidence supports it, but because the culture requires it, requires the belief that we are good, are just, are noble, are superior. And the superior is the story that every empire tells, is the myth that every dominant culture maintains, is the narrative that justifies conquest, exploitation, domination. Because if we are superior, then we have the right to rule, have the obligation to civilize, have the duty to spread our ways to those who are inferior, who are backward, who are lacking what we have. And what we have is not just wealth or technology or power, but is virtue, is morality, is the right way of being human. And the right way is our way, is the only way, is the way that must be imposed on others for their own good. And the good is what we define, is what our mirror shows, is what our mythology proclaims. And the proclaiming is not questioned internally, is not doubted by members, is accepted as truth, as obvious as the way things are. Because the culture has been internalized, has been absorbed, has become the framework through which reality is perceived, and perception is always filtered, is always shaped by the categories that culture provides, by the concepts that language offers, by the narratives that mythology supplies, and the supply is constant, is reinforced through education, through media, through the rituals that celebrate the culture, through the symbols that represent it, through the history that is taught. And the teaching is selective, is presenting only the parts that confirm the narrative, that support the myth, that maintain the reflection, and the reflection shows heroes, shows triumphs, shows progress, shows the culture moving toward perfection, toward the realization of its values, toward the fulfillment of its destiny. And the destiny is what the myth claims, is the belief that the culture is not just existing, but is going somewhere, is fulfilling a purpose, is playing a role in a larger story. And the story is always about us, is always centered on our experience, is always presenting our perspective as the perspective, our values as the values, our way as the way. And the way is not recognized as particular, but is experienced as universal, is not seen as one option among many, but is felt as the natural, the normal, the correct. And the correct is what blindness produces, is what the mirror creates, is the inability to see that the reflection is distorted, that the image is idealized, that the narrative is selective, and the selective is what creates the blind spots, is what prevents the culture from seeing its own violence, its own exploitation, its own contradictions, because these do not fit the narrative, do not confirm the myth, do not appear in the mirror, and so they are not seen, are not acknowledged, are not integrated into the culture's self-understanding, and the understanding remains partial, remains distorted, remains narcissistic, and the narcissism is not pathological in the individual sense, but is structural, is built into the way that cultures function, is necessary for cohesion, for identity, for the maintenance of boundaries. Because without the belief that we are special, the culture would dissolve, would fragment, would lose the binding force that makes a collection of individuals into a collective. And the collective requires mythology, requires shared stories, requires the mirror that reflects not individuals, but the group, not reality, but the ideal, not what is, but what is imagined. And the imagined is powerful, is shaping behavior, is creating expectations, is defining roles, is organizing life. And the organization is not neutral, is not innocent, is serving interests, is maintaining hierarchies, is justifying inequalities. Because the mythology always benefits some more than others, always privileges certain positions, always legitimates certain arrangements. And the legitimation is what the mirror provides, is what the myth accomplishes, is the conversion of contingent social arrangements into natural necessities of historical accidents, into inevitable developments of particular values, into universal truths. And the truths are not true, but are believed, are accepted, are acted upon. And the acting upon is what makes them real, in a sense, is what gives them power, is what makes them consequential. Because collective beliefs shape collective action, shape policy, shape war, shape empire. An empire is always justified through mythology, is always presenting itself as bringing civilization, bringing progress, bringing enlightenment to those who lack it. And the lack is projected, is assumed, is what the mirror does not show about the empire itself, which is that what it brings is often destruction, is exploitation, is the imposition of its ways onto others who did not ask for them, do not want them, are harmed by them, but the harm is not seen, is not reflected in the mirror, is not part of the narrative, because the narrative is about benevolence, about mission, about the burden that the superior must bear, and the burden is the story that Kipling told, is the myth that empires use, is the claim that domination is duty, that conquest is care. That exploitation is education, and the education is the transfer of culture, is the spreading of the superior ways, is the civilizing mission that justifies everything, that makes violence noble, that makes theft righteous, that makes subjugation liberation, and the liberation is what the empire claims to bring, is what its mythology proclaims, is what its mirror reflects, and the reflection is believed not just by rulers, but by the ruled, not just by exploiters, but by the exploited, because the mythology is totalizing, is pervasive, is shaping consciousness, is providing the categories through which experience is understood. An understanding within the mythology confirms the mythology, is circular, is self-reinforcing, is making it difficult to see outside, to recognize the distortion, to notice that the mirror is lying, and the lying is not intentional, is not conspiracy, is structural, is the way that collective narcissism operates, is the inevitable result of cultures needing to see themselves as good, as just, as right. And the right is always defined by the culture itself, is always reflecting back what the culture wants to see, is never showing what the culture is afraid to see, which is its own violence, its own hypocrisy, its own contingency. And the contingency is what every national myth denies, is what every claim to exceptionalism rejects, is the recognition that this culture could have been otherwise, that its values are not universal, but are particular, that its supremacy is not deserved, but is the result of power, of conquest, of accident. And the accident is what cannot be admitted, is what the mythology covers, is what the mirror hides, because admitting accident is admitting that the culture is not special, is not chosen, is not fulfilling destiny, but is just existing, just happening, just being one arrangement among many possible arrangements. And the many is what threatens, is what the other represents, is what must be denied in order to maintain the belief that we are the centre, are the standard, are the measure. And the measure is how cultures see others, is how they project onto difference. Everything they reject in themselves is how they create the barbarian, the savage, the backward, the enemy. And the enemy is necessary, is required by the mythology, is what defines the culture by contrast, is what makes us good by being bad, is what makes us civilized by being savage, is what makes us superior by being inferior. And the inferior is not discovered but is created, is constructed through the selection of differences, through the exaggeration of contrasts, through the interpretation of practices as evidence of backwardness. And the backwardness is what justifies intervention, justifies domination, justifies the spreading of our ways, because if they are backward, then they need us, need our help, need our civilization. And the civilization is what we bring, what we impose, what we force upon them for their own good. And the good is what we define, is what our values dictate, is what our mythology proclaims. And the proclaiming is not listening, is not dialogue, is not exchange, is imposition, is violence, is the erasure of their culture in the name of bringing them ours. And the erasure is not seen as violence, but is seen as progress, is seen as liberation, is seen as the inevitable movement toward the universal, which is really the particular disguised as universal, is our particular values presented as the values, our particular ways presented as the way, our particular culture presented as culture itself. And culture itself is what we believe we are, is what the mirror shows, is what the mythology claims, that we are not just a culture, but our culture, are not just civilized, but our civilization, are not just one way of being human, but are the way, the correct way, the superior way. And the superiority is what cannot be questioned internally, is what is taboo to doubt, is what is defended violently when challenged. Because challenging the myth is challenging the culture's identity, is threatening the collective narcissism, is disturbing the mirror, and the mirror must be maintained, must be protected, must be polished, because without it, the culture would have to see itself as it is, would have to confront its ordinariness, its violence, its contradictions. And the contradictions are everywhere, are visible to outsiders, are obvious to those who are not invested in the mythology, but are invisible to insiders, are not reflected in the mirror, are edited out of the narrative, are the blind spots that every culture has, that every mythology creates, that every collective narcissism requires, because seeing the contradictions would require changing, would require admitting error, would require acknowledging that the culture is not what it claims to be, is not as good as it believes, is not as just as it proclaims, and the proclaiming is constant, is part of the mythology, is the endless assertion that we are different, are better, are special, are the exception to the patterns that govern other cultures. And the exception is what every empire believes, is the myth of American exceptionalism, of British civilizing mission, of French universal values of every dominant culture that has ever existed, each believing that it is different, that it is not like the empires that came before, that its domination is justified where others were not, that its violence is necessary where others was cruel, that its expansion is liberation where others was conquest. And the difference is illusion, is projection, is the mirror showing what the culture needs to see, which is that we are good, are noble, are doing what is right, and the right is whatever we are doing, is whatever serves our interests, is whatever maintains our power, and the power is presented as service, as burden, as duty, and the duty is what the mythology creates, is the belief that we must spread our ways, must bring our civilization, must impose our order, because without us the world would be chaos, would be darkness, would be backward, and the backward is where others are, is what defines them, is what justifies our dominance, and the dominance is not called dominance, but is called leadership, is called guidance, is called help. And the help is not asked for, is not wanted, is imposed, is forced, is the violence that the mirror does not show, that the mythology does not name, that the culture does not see, because seeing it would require shattering the mirror, would require abandoning the myth, would require confronting the collective narcissism. And the confronting is what cannot happen, is what is too threatening, is what would destroy the culture's sense of itself. And the sense of itself is what the culture is the only coherence it has, is the mythology that makes it a culture rather than just a collection of people. And so the mirror is maintained, the myth is preserved, the narcissism continues, and the culture sees itself as it needs to see itself, as special, as superior, as exceptional. And the exceptional is what every culture believes, is the universal delusion, is the distorted reflection that is mistaken for reality, is the mirror stage of culture where the culture is forever trapped, forever seeing the idealized image, forever believing the mythology, forever blind to the contradictions, forever projecting onto others what it cannot acknowledge in itself, forever creating the other who absorbs the negativity, who represents the threat, who justifies the violence, and the violence continues, the mythology persists, the mirror remains, and cultures continue to see themselves as the center, as the standard, as the exception, and the exception is the lie, is the delusion, is the collective narcissism that every culture exhibits, that every mythology maintains, that every mirror reflects, and the reflecting is distorting, is hiding, is preventing the culture from seeing what it is, from acknowledging its contingency, from recognizing its violence, from confronting its contradictions, from shattering the mirror, from abandoning the myth, from giving up the narcissism. And the giving up is impossible, is what cultures cannot do, is what would mean their dissolution, their end, their transformation into something else. And the something else is what is feared, is what the mythology prevents, is what the mirror hides, is what the collective narcissism protects against. And the protection is the function, is what the distorted reflection accomplishes, is what makes cultures culture, is what allows collective identity, is what creates the binding force, and the force is mythology, is narrative, is the mirror that shows not truth, but need, not reality, but fantasy, not what is, but what must be believed. And the belief is collective, is shared, is the myth that we are special, are chosen, are exceptional, and the exceptional is the delusion, is the mirror stage of culture, is the permanent condition of collective consciousness, is the way that societies see themselves as distorted reflections, as idealized images, as mythological narratives, and the narratives are false, are projections, are narcissistic, and the narcissism is structural, is necessary, is what makes culture possible, is what creates cohesion, is what maintains the illusion that we are the center, are the standard, are the measure, and the measure is the mirror, is the myth, is the collective narcissism that every culture exhibits, that every society maintains, that every empire believes, that every nation proclaims. And the proclaiming is the distortion, is the reflection, is the mirror stage where culture is trapped, where it sees itself not as it is, but as it needs to be, not as truth, but as mythology, not as one among many, but as the one, the exceptional, the special, the superior. And the superior is the lie, is the mirror, is the stage where culture performs for itself, where it reflects its own image, where it sees only what it wants to see. And what it wants to see is that it matters, that it is right, that it is good. And the good is the reflection, is the myth, is the collective narcissism, is the mirror stage of culture where every culture is trapped, where every society remains, where every empire believes its own mythology, and the mythology is the mirror, is the distortion, is the way that cultures see themselves, as exceptional, as special, as superior. And the superior is the delusion, is the projection, is the narcissism, is the mirror stage that never ends, that continues forever, that defines culture, that creates the blind spots, that maintains the myth, that polishes the mirror, that reflects the lie. And the lie is believed, is shared, is what makes culture culture. And culture is the mirror, is the stage, is the collective narcissism, is the distorted reflection, is the mythology, is the illusion that we are exceptional. And the exceptional is what every culture believes, is the universal delusion, is the mirror stage of culture that shows not truth but need, not reality but fantasy, not what is but what must be seen. And the seeing is distorted, is narcissistic, is collective, is the way that cultures see themselves, forever, inevitably, necessarily, as the center, as the standard, as the exception. And the exception is the myth, is the mirror, is the stage where culture performs, where it reflects, where it believes its own lies, and the lies are the culture, are the mythology, are the collective narcissism, are the mirror stage that every society inhabits, that every culture maintains, that every empire believes. And the believing is the distortion, is the reflection, is the way that cultures see themselves as exceptional when they are ordinary, as superior when they are equal, as chosen when they are contingent. And the contingent is what the mirror hides, is what the myth denies, is what the collective narcissism protects against. And the protection is permanent, is structural, is what makes the mirror stage of culture eternal, inevitable, universal. The way that all societies see themselves as distorted reflections, as idealized images, as mythological narratives that are believed, that are shared, that are maintained, that are the culture, that are the mirror, that are the stage, that are the collective narcissism that defines human social existence, that creates the blind spots, that justifies the violence, that maintains the myth, that every culture exhibits, that every society believes, that every empire proclaims. And the proclaiming is the mirror, is the stage, is the distorted reflection that is culture seeing itself.